All right, y'all, we are back. Day 17 of the Sam Bankman-Fried trial and the second to last day. That's right, folks. Tomorrow will be the last day that we hear anything from any of the attorneys. From there, it'll get handed over to the jury to make a final decision and give us a verdict on whether Sam Bankman-Fried is guilty or innocent across 7 different charges. Whew! Today we got closing arguments. We got closing arguments from the prosecution. We finished closing arguments from the defense. Court ran long so that we could finish hearing these damn closing arguments. So I am running behind today. Tomorrow we will actually hear a rebuttal close from the prosecution. Since burden of proof is on the prosecution to show that Sam did these things they're saying he did, they get to have the final word in terms of closing arguments. So we'll hear from prosecution one more time tomorrow. And then we'll have jury instructions. Kaplan will give instructions to the jury as to how they should be thinking about these 7 different charges he's up for. And then they'll have it in their hands to deliberate. So much information today. I mean, imagine sitting. Truly, court started at 9:30. We got out of there around 6. We took breaks in between, but call it like 7 hours, maybe a little bit less than that, 6.5 hours just straight of people talking. One individual. It was like one person on the prosecution just talks. One person on the defense just talks. 4 hours. So there is so much information, but I think I have a sense of what to me feels most important. I will say prosecution did very well on their closing arguments. Not entirely a surprise. Defense, though, also did okay. I mean, I don't, we'll talk about my impressions of this all at the end, but in some ways defense did better than I thought they were going to do, though the bar on that is quite low because I haven't felt that they have done particularly well up to this point. So let's break this down. I'm going to start with the prosecution and tell you everything they said, but first I do want to hear a word from our amazing sponsors who make this show possible. Thank you, OpenSea, Web3 Sense, and Ledger. Let me introduce you to a brand new company that I could not be more excited about, Web3 Sense. A Web3 analytics platform that combines on-chain data with social media insights to give you the deepest, most meaningful intelligence into any NFT community. I have tested other analytics platforms out there, but Web3 Sense has the most comprehensive capabilities I've seen in the NFT ecosystem. They apply sophisticated data science to wallet histories to determine behavioral patterns and help shape predictive analytics. In other words, they can tell you which Twitter accounts are actually the influencers in your space. And they can tell you what resonates most within a community by looking at what other communities token holders are involved in. The number of use cases here is virtually unlimited. So whether you're a trader, creator, institution, brand, agency, I promise Web3 Sense has data that you want to see with the deep and actionable insights that you need to build, analyze, grow, start, whatever you want to do within the NFT space and in terms of building a business and a community. Now, they are still in very early days, so they're eager to connect with the community. So if you're interested in learning more about what Web3 Sense can do for you and your business, and you should be, go and fill out the very short form linked to in the show notes, and someone from their team will reach out with more information and an opportunity for a product demo. Trust me, you won't regret it. All right, we are back. Also, a reminder, if you're liking this content, please do like, subscribe, follow. If you're listening on audio, you can subscribe to the podcast that way. Thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me. Okay. Diving in today with the prosecution. The prosecution's refrain throughout this and the structure of their closing argument was what happened, where did it go, who is responsible. That was really how they were framing up. They repeated that over and over again. What happened? They said thousands of customers lost billions of dollars. That's what happened. Where did it go? Well, we know where it went. It went to real estate. It went to marketing expenses. It went to venture investments, et cetera, et cetera. And then who is responsible? Of course, ultimately, wait, this is not right. It should only be 3 fingers. If you're listening, I was holding up the wrong number of fingers. In any case, who is responsible? Of course, the prosecution says it is one man. It is Sam Bankman-Fried. Of course, there's others who are responsible as well, but they have already pled guilty. And the prosecution said that if you believe any one of the witnesses, if you believe Gary, Caroline, or Nishad, you must find Sam guilty because their testimonies directly implicate him as being guilty on these fraud charges. Now, the prosecution did go through actually both counsels ended up going through each of the specific charges. So for example, charges 1 and 2, 1 is committed wire fraud against customers, 2 is conspiracy to commit wire fraud against customers, 3 and 4 are wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud against lenders to Alameda, 7 is the money laundering charge, all the 5 is securities fraud against investors, 6 is conspiracy to commit commodities fraud. I'm not going to go through, I might do a video tomorrow, honestly, going through each of the charges and then looking at the evidence for each of them. I'm not going to do that in this video, but know that each of the counsels did speak at least a little bit at a high level to each of the charges and why they felt he was guilty, or in the case of the defense making their case, of course, why he's not guilty. So what the prosecution also did today, though, that I thought was really interesting is they laid out, they said, here are the 6 moments that we think you need to bear in mind as being the moments that Sam had an opportunity to do the right thing, where he was confronted with the reality of the situation, the fact that he was spending customer money, that Alameda was spending customer money, where he did not do the right thing. And this was pretty effective, I thought. So the first moment was in the summer of 2021, when Sam made the decision to buy back FTX stock from Binance. This was a $2 billion deal they did, where they paid $2 billion to get this FTX stock back. And Caroline Ellison had testified, and the prosecution brought this up, that Alameda didn't have that money on hand. And she told Sam that in order to do this, in order to buy back the Binance shares and spend $2 billion on that, they were going to need to borrow from FTX. And Sam said, that's fine. This is really important. It's super important that we do this. I think it's important enough, whatever. And the prosecution's point is Sam knew in that moment that borrowing from FTX meant borrowing from FTX customers. I mean, this was the middle of 2021, and FTX made a total of $1 billion in all of 2021. Now, they also raised some money, but the point is, like, they didn't have $1 billion. FTX didn't have $1 billion in profits or revenue on hand for Alameda to borrow to spend to pay back Binance. So this inherently meant taking the money from customers. Now, Sam will say he saw that as borrowing and is somehow okay. Prosecution would say, obviously not okay. So that's moment number 1, buying back the stock from Binance in the summer of 2021. And that decision was firmly made by Sam. We know this. Okay. Moment number 2, when the prosecution says Sam should have known better and do better and didn't, was in late 2021, early 2022, Sam wanted to allocate about $3 billion to make venture investments. And he even tweeted about it in early 2022, announcing like this venture fund that they were launching. And he asked Caroline to run a series of scenarios to analyze what would happen if a market crash happened. Of course, a market crash did happen. So Sam, in late 2021, asked Caroline to analyze a variety of different situations in which the market fell by large percentages and said, like, what would happen to Alameda's financial situation then. And Caroline prepared these spreadsheets looking at these various scenarios and included in that, like, the customer assets, like there's $3 billion, there's like $7 billion in customer assets that have been deposited on FTX. And she included that in some of her math, saying, like, if the market falls, we'll only be okay, essentially, if we dip into some of these customer funds, basically, is what she was saying. And Caroline advocated that they not make a bunch more venture investments because they were already in a tenuous position, or could be in a tenuous position if the market fell. Nevertheless, Sam, and Sam alone, as far as we know, made the decision to go forward. He's the one who announced this, like, venture funds. I forget exactly what it was called. I don't think, it may have been FTX Ventures, frankly, in the beginning of 2022. Now, we didn't get into some of the nitty gritty parts of this. I will say Sam had been thinking about investing $3 billion. Ultimately, after this exercise, he only invested $2 billion. He had also asked Caroline specifically to make some of the open term loans that they had with their lenders into fixed term loans. The open term loans were riskier for Alameda versus fixed term loans. So, Caroline had done various analyses that showed, well, if we actually had fixed term loans instead of open term loans, we'll probably be okay in a market downturn scenario. But all of that is sort of irrelevant because at the end of the day, Caroline wasn't able to get most of their open term loans turned into fixed term loans. And Sam nevertheless went ahead with this venture investing stuff. So that was moment number 2, according to the prosecution. Moment number 3, where Sam could have made a different decision and did not, was in June of 2022, when he, depending on who you believe, he either told Caroline to go return money to third-party lenders, or he simply agreed with her that it was the correct thing to do to return the money to lenders. Gary and Caroline testified that Sam told her to do it. Sam testified that he merely kind of signed off on the decision, but that he had incomplete information. I mean, we have talked about this June 2022 period so much on this show because it's been such a focal point of this whole trial. because it was in June of 2022 that lenders are recalling their loans to Alameda. Simultaneously, the market has crashed. So a lot of Alameda's assets that they were holding have gone down in value quite a bit. There were all these budgeting meetings happening around that time in June of 2022. And as part of those budgeting meetings, there was conversations around the fact that Alameda was borrowing billions of dollars from FTX. I believe the number was about $10 billion that Alameda was borrowing from FTX at that point. And yet Sam still said, go ahead, return the borrows, despite having all that information. Now, I'm not saying more on that because this is actually going to tie into number 4, the number 4 moment that the prosecution says was a seminal moment for Sam to make a different decision that he did not make, was in that same time period, in June of 2022, when Caroline sent very misleading, arguably just false balance sheets to lenders of Alameda. So in June of 2022, folks are asking for their money back. Some companies are also asking for balance sheets. And some companies, like Genesis in particular, is one that was referenced in this case. They're asking for money back, but they're still they're still seen by Sam and Caroline and others as a potential source of funds for Alameda in the future, right? Yes, they're asking for their money back now. I don't know that they asked for all of their money back, though, to be honest. And I think there was a belief that like they could come back in as lenders down the line once things cool off. So it was important to get the balance sheet that was sent to them right. Now, obviously, the rest of us would use the term right to mean accurate. In this case, what Caroline and Sam wanted to do was to make the balance sheet look more appealing. So Caroline has testified, and we've talked about this a number of times on the show. Caroline testified that when she made the balance sheet in June of 2022 to send to Genesis, she looked at it and was like, this does not seem like a balance sheet that we can send to a lender or potential lender, because it showed that they were borrowing $10 billion from FTX, and it showed that they had given loans out. They had made loans to the tune of about $5 billion to FTX executives who then invested them in other parts of Alameda. Anyways, it was part of the scheme to ultimately make these venture investments in things like Anthropic and GDA and whatever else. So Caroline's like, this doesn't look good. But she, according to Caroline, she sends the real balance sheet to Sam. And she says, hey, I don't think we can send this to Genesis. Sam says he then agreed. Or I'm sorry, Caroline says that Sam agreed. Sam does not acknowledge this part of this scenario. He seems to not claim that this happened. But Caroline says she sent a true balance sheet to Sam, said, we can't use this. Sam, according to Caroline, said, I agree. Why don't you prepare some alternatives for me to look at? So then Caroline says she prepared 7 alternative balance sheets, sends them to Sam. We see this document. We've seen this in court many times. It's a spreadsheet with 8 different tabs at the bottom, one that's called main, and then 7 alternative tabs. And then Caroline says that Sam chose tabs Alt 7, that tab, as the one that should be sent to Genesis, despite the fact that it was really a completely inaccurate balance sheet. It wildly understated the real risk of Alameda's balance sheets. And Caroline says that she went off and sent it. Now, Sam, of course, says that he only saw the Alt 7 tab, which really doesn't make any damn sense, because when he opened the spreadsheet, it would have opened onto the main tab. And that's, of course, to say nothing about the fact that I tend to believe Caroline that she sent him an initial balance sheet, said, hey, what do you think about this? He said, or hey, I don't think we can send this. He agreed. Anyways, but that's even aside from that, even if he had just opened the one with all 8 tabs, he would have opened onto the main spreadsheet tab. So anyway, that is moment number 4. It's connected to this whole moment about all this accounting that they were doing in June, that the prosecution says, this is how we know Sam knew about all of this and nevertheless defrauded customers, investors, lenders. I'm going to speak a little bit more to that once I finish getting through this list of 6 key moments, which I did think was a good way to frame this all up. Okay. Moment number 5 has us now jumping ahead to September, which is the other time period in this whole trial that we've probably talked about the most, which is the period in time in which Sam circulates a document suggesting that Alameda potentially be shut down. Now, I will say I have brought this up before, and the defense actually brought this up today in their close, which I thought was smart. And I've actually thought the defense should bring it up even before they did, right? But they brought it up today, which is, if Sam A was like this mastermind fraudster whose entire scheme was about funneling money from FTX to Alameda to enrich his hedge fund, why would he spend hours preparing a document about why to shut down Alameda and then circulate that document and have his deputies go around and like figure out if that was viable? And then part B of that, which is really what I've been saying, which is if Sam had a really good grasp in June, as the prosecution alleges, of exactly the financial situation and what all was going down and how much Alameda was borrowing, why would he then suggest in September, same thing, why would he suggest shutting Alameda down in September? So I do think that's a little bit of a weird inconsistency. I think there are explanations for it. And frankly, I think there's explanations for it that make more sense than the idea that Sam wasn't paying any attention to the balance sheets. He was being sent in June, which again was a time period in which for a moment in time, he actually thought Alameda was insolvent. There was a moment in June where he thought that because of this bug that we've talked about before. So it's just very hard to believe that the CEO of a company was not paying attention to the balance sheets of his hedge fund when he at one point thought it was maybe insolvent. Like clearly that seems unbelievable. But I do think the fact that he still was thinking about shutting Alameda down in September and circulating this document indicates a certain amount of like, he still thought they could get themselves out of this situation as of September. It doesn't mean he didn't know that they were using customer money, but it shows there was some amount of like, not really grasping the scope of this on his part as of September. Okay, so prosecution says September 2022, another key moment, because here, once again, he's talking about shutting down Alameda. He has his deputies go investigate it. His deputies on a thread that he's also on are like, yeah, so Alameda owes $13.7 billion is the number. So some people were calling it 13 billion, some people were calling it 14 billion. Whatever, I'll round up to 14 billion. Alameda owes $14 billion to FTX. So we actually really can't shut this down. And in Sam's testimony, he said that he, quote, was never, he's not confident he was given a reason as to why Alameda couldn't be shut down. That also seems strange. This is a point the prosecution made where they were like, so he spent hours preparing a document about shutting it down. He has his deputies go figure out if they can shut it down. And then he doesn't bother getting a firm answer as to why they can't shut it down. That's not really believable. Totally agree on that. Not believable. Which tells us that in September of 2022, Sam knew that that Alameda owed about $14 billion to FTX at that time. Finally, number 6, the final moment where the defense says, like, that was like a seminal moment for the defendant, a time when we know Sam knew that customer money was being used for something but didn't do anything, or opposite of that, like actively participated in the using of customer money, was in November of 2022. And he says what's important about November of 2022, of course, this is when everything is starting to implode, are the false tweets that Sam sent out in that November period. We've gone over them a number of times here. It's the tweets that y'all probably remember because you probably lived through it like I did. I remember seeing this tweet by Sam saying, FTX is fine, assets are fine, we don't invest customer money even in treasuries, et cetera, et cetera. All these tweets meant and sent to reassure customers, frankly, to stop customers from withdrawing their money from FTX, because behind the scenes, Sam is starting to do the math in November and is going, yeah, we don't have enough. We don't have enough to cover all of the customer assets if all of them were to withdraw. So that's it. Those are the 6 moments that the prosecution identified. And that last piece, that false tweet part, that's really important because that's essentially the prosecution's point throughout all of this, is that while all of this stuff was happening behind the scenes, even let's say even if maybe it was okay for Alameda to be borrowing some amount of customer money, Sam was out in the world saying FTX is the safest place to trade crypto in ads, that Super Bowl ads that were going out to literally millions of people, right? He was saying that in congressional testimony. He was saying that in tweets. He was saying that in documents that were being sent to potential investors, right? They were saying publicly over and over again how safe it was to invest in this. And that's misrepresentative. Even if he could invest customer assets, which, frankly, there's a little bit of debate about that because the terms of service didn't specifically identify that fiat deposits couldn't be used by Alameda or couldn't be loaned out, I guess, by FTX really. But even if you believe that, which most people don't, right? Most people think, no, clearly this wasn't okay. Like the fact that he was saying all these other things, my sense is makes it fraud because he was lying about all of this. Okay. But him being found guilty is also contingent on some amount of intent. He had to know he was doing something wrong. If the jury believes that he did any number of these things in good faith, believing that what he was doing was okay, that's a reason to find him not guilty. And this comprises probably the thrust of what the defense argued today, which brings us to the closing arguments by the defense. But before we do, we just need to hear a word from our sponsors. Thank you, OpenSea, Ledger, Web3 You make the show possible. I am so grateful to each of you. Let me tell you about OpenSea Studio. Yes, you know OpenSea. Perhaps you use OpenSea, but did you know they launched OpenSea Studio? It's a one-stop shop for all creators to launch and manage their projects. Using OpenSea Studio, you can create and manage a drop end-to-end, including setting up allow list phases, uploading media and metadata, which has helpful preview functionality, and building the drop page itself. You can also mint an NFT or collection where the creator owns the contract. OpenSea Studio lets you build on all blockchains compatible with OpenSea, and there are 8 of them. Lets buyers mint an NFT from your collection using a credit or debit card, and there are no coding or technical skills required to do any of the above. OpenSea will be adding more features and functionality to OpenSea Studio over the coming months, including revamped collection pages with new storytelling modules, and more ways to leverage NFT technology, including redeemables, which y'all know I'm a huge fan of, and analytics. I'm an OpenSea user because they have the best selection of NFTs and a truly inclusive view of the NFT ecosystem, supporting, as I said, 8 chains in 8 global languages. And because I trust the systems they've built to help keep the space safe, like copyright protection, malicious URL detection or removal, robust verification, and more. It is why they are the place to buy, sell, and now create NFTs. Check them out at the link below, and you'll be supporting the show in the process. Okay, so let's turn now to the defense's closing arguments. The prosecution said Sam absolutely knew that customer money was being used. I'm frankly quite inclined to agree. And then the prosecution said, but the second question is, did Sam know it was wrong? Prosecution, of course, says yes, he did. We'll maybe talk about a little bit about that in a moment as well. But the defense at their core is saying no, is saying that Sam acted in good faith. He didn't know it was wrong. And the way they framed that is by saying over and over again that what the prosecution doesn't focus on is the why. Why were things the way they were? And I think there's some legitimacy to this. So for example, what the defense focused on were things like allow negative, which we've heard a bunch about in this case, and the line of credit that Alameda had in this case, both the allow negative feature that was coded into FTX's exchange code and the line of credit. Alameda famously had a $65 billion line of credit, or perhaps infamously, they famously or infamously had a $65 billion line of credit. And to be clear, it became infamous well after the exchange had imploded because it was not publicized that Alameda had a $65 billion line of credit to investors or customers or anybody else. But the defense made the point that there were legitimate business reasons that both of these things existed. And in fact, both of these things were in many ways, in many respects, a response to some specific something that had happened on the platform that had caused the team to change the code, to change the rules, to help Alameda better serve customers and better prevent like some bad risk stuff from happening on the exchange. This is actually true. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, but I am sufficiently convinced that there were reasons for these various things to be in place beyond simply trying to funnel money from FTX to Alameda. But they also served to allow Alameda to borrow billions upon billions of dollars from FTX, even when they really shouldn't have been. So things aren't black and white, like they're not mutually exclusive, right? Both of these things can be true, and I believe they both are true. So defense is making the point that there were legitimate reasons for some of these features to be put in. Now, I mean, I say that they shouldn't be there. Those features should not have been there, frankly, and they should have figured out other ways to solve the problems they were trying to solve for. But they were legitimate in the sense that there were reasons for having them that was about solving legitimate business problems, if I've articulated that in a way that makes any sense to anyone. So anyways, point being, the defense is making the argument that like why really matters here, why things were the way they were matter, why Sam made the decisions he made matters. Because if you believe, if you even have a little bit of doubt in your head that says maybe Sam made all of these decisions in good faith, believing that what he was doing was okay, then he is innocent. So that was the main message of the defense, and I'm going to get a little bit more into that in a moment. But first, I wanted to talk about how Cohen opened his closing arguments, because it left something to be desired, in my opinion, which is we get to the defense's closing arguments right off of the prosecution's closing arguments, of course, and Cohen's like opening statements as part of this broader closing arguments that he was making were around how the prosecution has created this movie villain character version of Sam that is totally foreign from the actual version of Sam, and how the prosecution really doesn't have that much evidence. And instead of having evidence, all they do is focus on these movie villainous characteristics of Sam. Like, they focus on his clothes, and they focus on the fact that he doesn't cut his hair, and they focus on showing you pictures of him sleeping on private jets and pictures of him, you know, shuffling cards to make it look like he's a gambler, and like on and on about all of these cosmetic things. And I've talked about these on the show before. I actually agreed to an extent, which is that I do think the prosecution has talked about all of these things, and I haven't found that particularly compelling on their part, because I actually don't think the fact that Sam was calculated about his appearance, and that Sam wore shorts and t-shirts and didn't cut his hair because he thought it made him look more like the cult figure that people wanted to invest in or whatever. Like, I don't find that nefarious at all. Even believing that Sam is guilty, I think it's totally fine that a CEO be calculated about the image they want to portray. I agree. Like, I don't think that him shuffling cards in a picture is, you know, proof of him being a gambler. Apparently he was just doing it because he had a fidget or whatever, even though Sam was a gambler, right? But whatever. So I agree with the defense when they make these points. However, it was like there was a total disconnect because the prosecution didn't bring up any of these things. The way he dressed, his hair, the photo of him shuffling cards in their closing arguments. So we spend 3 hours listening to Nicholas Roos, the prosecutor who did the closing arguments. We spent 3 hours listening to him talk basically all about evidence. And then you have Mark Cohen get up there for the defense and be like, I sometimes wonder what trial we're even attending here, because they're really just attacking Sam's character for silly things like the clothes he wore and the haircut he had. And they really, in absence of evidence, they just show you pictures of him sleeping on private planes. And it was like, have you been here for the last 3 hours? They didn't mention any of those things. They literally only talked about evidence. Like, you clearly wrote this closing argument before you'd heard what they had to say. And then you didn't have time to like scramble and rewrite your intro or something, because it was like maybe you should have called an audible on this one, bud, because it really doesn't match with what we just experienced. Now, to be fair, like I said, I do think that there's a bit of truth to Cohen's point if you look at the entirety of this trial, but it's definitely not the basis of the government's case, given that they didn't bring up any of these things in closing arguments. Okay, so that was not a great point by Cohen. A couple other points that I thought were really weak by the defense, and then I'll talk a little bit about what I thought some of the good points are, though I've addressed some of them here. This was a funny one. Cohen kept pointing out that Sam merely thought that FTX had a liquidity problem. This is sort of the story that the defense is going with, is Sam made good faith decisions. He wasn't trying to defraud anybody. He believed that Alameda had a certain amount of right to borrow within certain confines money from FTX, and that they were doing so within those bounds, that he was not tracking it very closely, that their accounting system was a mess, that it was the admin dashboard that he relied on to get information was muddled and unclear. And so he really didn't have a keen sense of the situation throughout 2022, and that it was only in November that the full picture really came together from him, and he realized what kind of crisis they were in. But that at various points, they will admit, he was under the impression that they had a bit of a liquidity problem. So Mark Cohen literally used this word liquidity problem. And it's like, a liquidity problem because why, Mark? Why did they have a liquidity problem, Sam? Because they were using customer money, and the customers might want that back liquid, right? They wanted their liquid dollars back, and they didn't have them. And so this gets to the heart of this whole thing, which is in some ways what we've gotten down to here in this case is a question of whether or not you believe Sam knew what he was doing was wrong. Because there's some amount of alignment at this point, I would say, in what actually happened. Sure, we can disagree on like Sam still trying to pretend he hadn't seen numbers as of June or September. But the truth is, the defense is clearly also trying to make the argument that Sam didn't think it was wrong to take some amount of customer money. So like in some ways you could say, even if he knew in June, who really gives a shit? Because apparently he thought it was okay at some level. So there's almost a little bit of doublespeak happening there by the defense, which is why I think them making this comment about there being a liquidity problem is pretty damning, because it's like, all right, so if he knew there was a liquidity problem. Okay, so this gets us to this question of, did Sam know what he was doing is wrong? And I'm definitely of the opinion that the answer is yes. Now, I probably don't think the answer is as strong of a yes as other people do. I know there's people who really believe that this whole thing was criminal from the jump, that Sam basically started FTX as a way to just funnel money to Alameda, that there was nothing legitimate about any of this. I definitely do not take that view. I think that these were two legitimate businesses and things spiraled out of control. But I very much believe that Sam knew he was crossing lines. And at a number of different points, he very much knew what he was doing was wrong, that he was crossing lines, and that he just felt like he could manage the risk well enough to get away with the lines he was crossing. And unfortunately, he wasn't. And also, unfortunately, even if he had, the stuff he was doing was still a crime. And so at the end of the day, I believe that Sam knew these things were wrong, and the prosecution pointed this out multiple times because he was clearly trying to hide a number of these facts from all sorts of people, investors, the public, lenders. He was not being forthcoming at all about the relationship between Alameda and FTX. Now, he would claim that he thought technically the things he was saying were true, but the things he was saying publicly, if you consider them true, it was in such a narrow technical sense that the way they were phrased had to have been intentional, which suggests that he was intentionally not phrasing them in other ways that would have been probably a bit more forthcoming, which demonstrates he knew what he was doing was wrong, because if he didn't think what he was doing was wrong, he would have just given the forthcoming version out the gate, like originally. There would have been no need to get these like technically true, narrow versions out to the public or to investors or to lenders. So, I don't have to belabor this point. I imagine that pretty much everyone who watches my videos or listens on the podcast is under the same impression. But I do think in some ways that's what this comes down to. But of course, defense was trying to make the opposite point, though for me, ultimately, not convincingly. Okay, last thing I want to say here are just some of the good points that I think defense made today. And I would say one I've already mentioned is the fact they did highlight the fact that why would Sam even think shutting down Alameda was possible in September of 2022 if he was closely tracking all of the numbers throughout the year? But the real biggest point that I thought the defense made that I thought was good, which is, again, a version of one that I've been making to people, is all four of these witnesses, or all four of these co-conspirators, let's say, Sam, Gary, Nishad, and Caroline, have different stories as to when they found out or figured out that customer money was being used. I mean, Gary says he knew as early as potentially 2019, like early 2020. Caroline says, I think 2020 or maybe a somewhat similar time frame. Nishad says he learned that there was this big liability in June, but didn't realize that customer money was really being used until September. And Caroline, even herself, really would put her timestamp, I think, more as at June in terms of the real problem. So the defense did a good job of pointing out, okay, this was not some conspiracy where Sam sat down with all of them, or there was some conversation where they all were like clearly trying to steal a bunch of money from FTX customers to trade with Alameda or to buy real estate or whatever. This was something that sort of gradually happened because of a variety of different mechanisms and a variety of different decisions that were being made by different stakeholders. And then at different points, I mean, despite the fact that Gary and Nishad worked closely with one another day in and day out, they had vastly different points at which they each testified to realizing what was going on. And I think that's important because this isn't just a clear-cut conspiracy case where like they were clearly sitting down, planning to take money from customers, and then hoping that they would just be able to jet off into the sunset before they got arrested. This didn't have to end this way. In fact, there was so many different ways this could have not ended this way. So I think that is compelling. Now, again, I think Sam was doing something wrong, knew he was doing something wrong, just thought he could manage the risk enough to not get to the point where it all blew up. And that is still a crime, but it is different in degree to a crime where the plan out the gate is to perpetrate a crime on a bunch of victims. And then I do think the defense closed well in the sense that Cohen, who is by and large, I think, been not a great defense attorney in this case, and he's very soft-spoken, and that can make him kind of sleepy. It means it's hard to listen to him sometimes. It's hard to really know what are the most salient points he's making. But his manner of speaking, I thought, actually was kind of effective for the very end of his closing statement, where there was this earnestness and him just saying, look, the last thing I'm going to say is I'm going to speak for Sam, who is my client, and his life is in your hands now. And thank you to you for being here and being a part of this. He didn't say it like this, but this I was going to say American process. That wasn't really it. But being a part of this process, you know, you're going to hear from the prosecution again, and then you're going to go back and deliberate. And we ask that you, as you do that, think of us, think of the defense, think of this person whose life is in your hands, and think of what we would say, because the burden of proof is really on the prosecution to prove to you that he did this. We didn't have to put on any case at all. It's really on the prosecution to prove that any of this happened. And I'm not doing it well here, but there was something, and I talked to others who actually found this as well, like there was something kind of moving about it. And like, this is somebody's life that we're dealing with, and we can all sit here, and I definitely laugh at some of this stuff because it is entertaining to me, and I think I have every right to find it entertaining, but there's a human being behind all of this, and there's a whole thousands of other human beings who have been hurt in this whole situation who are also behind all of this. So there was some solemnity to the way that Cohen closed, which hit me. So anyway, all right, folks, that was day 17. Tomorrow, like I said, we'll hear once more from the prosecution, then we'll get jury instructions, and then the jury will deliberate. I'm thinking that my video tomorrow will be really taking you through the jury instructions, as in what needs to be found for each of these 7 charges for Sam to be found guilty for each of these 7 charges, and then talking to you about the evidence that we have for each of them. Right now, my suspicion is that money laundering is going to be the hardest charge to prove. Based on what I've seen, I think the first 6 charges feel like I would definitely be voting to convict based on what I've seen, from what I understand, for those first 6 charges. But the money laundering charge, I want to understand a little bit better, because I think there's a chance that's one where we could maybe see him being found not guilty. But we'll see. That's what I'll get into tomorrow. I mean, it could change if I hear something in court that I think is more important, but that's what I'm planning on tomorrow. And thank you so much for listening. I know this was a bit longer of a video, but it was a very long day of dense, information-packed closing arguments. So I appreciate you sticking with me. And with that, please do like, subscribe, comment. As always, I really appreciate it. And I will see y'all tomorrow. Y'all know the phrase, not your keys, not your crypto. Well, in a world where too many people have had to learn that the hard way, Overpriced JPEGs is proud to partner with Ledger, the world leader in critical digital asset security. Ledger's Nano S Plus and Nano X hardware wallets, paired with the Ledger Live app, Ledger's own software for setting up your Nano device and managing your crypto assets, is the easiest way to start your crypto journey while maintaining full control of your digital assets. You can use all your favorite dApps with Ledger Live, accessing 15 plus Web3 apps, including 1inch, Paraswap, Lido, and Zerion. So you can not only manage, but also grow your portfolio. And Ledger Live is available on mobile and desktop. Securing digital assets shouldn't be complicated. Ledger is as easy as it gets. Uncompromising security, effortless connectivity, full transparency, Ledger is your one-stop shop to trade and track crypto, grow your assets, and manage NFTs. Secure your future with Ledger. Visit shop.ledger.com today or check out the link in the show notes.